Okay, it looks like it's noon. We can get started here. If you are all looking for the Tools for Resilience, Strong Foundations, Bright Futures presentation. Ooh, I like that view, Teresa. You are in the right spot. It's going to be an exciting presentation. She's going to be right there in front of the slides. So let me minimize the screen so I can read my script up here. Hi, everyone. My name is Trenton Lee, and I'm moderating today's chat and introducing today's speaker. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that today's presentation is being recorded and will be available on both the Northern Lakes and North Country websites at the conclusion of the series. Quickly, I'd like to plug some upcoming Mental Health Awareness Month events. This Saturday in Petoskey, North Country Community Mental Health is hosting the 23rd annual Splash of Color Fun Run and Walk. There is a 5K course with colorful checkpoints where runners will get splashed with color. And it's also in conjunction with a mental health awareness walk along US 31. Registration opens for that at 9 a.m. on Saturday. You can attend, show up for free, or you can also register for a $25 t-shirt. And all proceeds for that will be donated to the North Country's Client Special Needs Fund, which is a fund that helps our clients achieve their treatment goals. There's also a very long list of events being hosted by both North Country and Northern Lakes that are taking place throughout the Northern Michigan region. However, that list is too long to plug everything at the beginning of this presentation. We want to save that time for Teresa here. But you can check out both agencies' websites for a full list of those events. With that, I'm going to introduce today's speaker. Today we have Teresa Guazdala, who is presenting her presentation on the presentation called Strong Foundations, Bright Futures, Building a Healthy Tomorrow. Today's presentation is an overview of the parent-infant relationship and its impact on mental health, well-being, and resiliency. Teresa is an infant mental health therapist at North Country Community Mental Health, and she has been working with families and children in a variety of settings over the past 15 years. Teresa also is an avid reader and a gardener. Her gardening journey is fun to follow on social media. And she loves spending time outdoors and with family. She is kindly asking that everyone save their questions for the end, but if you can go ahead and pop those questions as they come up into the chat, and I will just hold those questions until the end. So with that, I'll hand it over to Teresa, and I will see you all in the chats.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. I'm so excited to get to talk about this topic. I could go on and on about it for hours, so I will try to keep myself at an even pace here today. So, we're going to be talking about infant mental health. And oftentimes, when I tell people that I'm an infant mental health therapist, they're a little bit confused and they think, well, Teresa, infants can't talk. How do we really help promote their mental health? What are we doing here? And the truth is that it's about their well being and it's about their overall emotional and social growth, typically from birth to about age 4, is what we're looking at today. Within this, we specifically look at the early relationships, typically the primary caregiver or parent and that child dyad. This is the foundation for social, emotional, and neurological development for young children. Infant mental health can help to prevent mental illness later in life, and we know that early intervention changes the foundation for which a child will grow and explore and learn and succeed. If we set children up for a good beginning right from the start, they have all of the tools and skills to be able to face life's challenges later on as they're coming up. Part of this is prevention work. What we're doing, like I mentioned, is building foundations. We want to help give families the skills that they need to have caring relationships with their children. That caring relationship is the driving force for all prevention strategies and for children's success later in life. I work really hard on empowering parents. That's a huge part of infant mental health is making sure that the parents know that they're able to meet the needs of their children and that they're able to provide safety and love even in the middle of dysregulation. If anybody's been around infants or young children very much, you know that there's frequently a high level of dysregulation, and that can be extremely triggering for adults. So we want to make sure that they feel that they're able to meet the needs of that child in the midst of themselves feeling dysregulated and in the midst of the child being dysregulated. We want to work on strengthening trust. This stage is called the trust versus mistrust stage in psychosocial development. And what really is important is that the child knows that they are safe to have their needs met. They know that their caregiver is going to be there for them, that they don't have to worry for anything. And when they have that safety, they're able to start branching out, learning new things, and gaining new skills. We also want to prevent a crisis from happening. When we work in a prevention model, we're lowering the prevalence of families going into a mental health crisis later in adolescence and adulthood. The goal of prevention is to make something never happen. What we want to do is make sure that when those stressors come up that might have caused a crisis, if they didn't have these skills, that they're able to face these challenges with confidence, knowing that they have the skills to get through it. We also want to think about repairing disruption. We know that there is constant disruption in your life when you are with young children. It can bring up so many things from parents' past, from their histories. We know that children themselves are a pretty big disruption in life. They change everything up, and you have to adjust all of your expectations and everything that you were doing before to now have this new life with a little person running around who needs you constantly. So we want to make sure that we're helping families get through that disruption and to have good, strong emotional growth as they're going. So, a huge part of this infant mental health at its heart is about attachment. And attachment is that deep emotional bond between an infant and the people who provide the most care for them. This could be the parents, this could be grandparents, aunts, uncles, it could be a nanny or a child care worker. All of those people are going to have different levels of attachment with that infant. And we want to make sure that they're having good attachments. Attachments impact how infants develop across all learning domains, whether it's physical, cognitive, or social. Ideally, what we'd like to see happening is for an infant to have a secure attachment with their caregivers. Children who have those secure attachments feel loved, they feel secure and confident, and they're able to explore the world within that security. That security gives them confidence and it gives them the ability to know that as they venture out, it's going to be okay because their caregivers have their back. Their caregivers are reliable. They're able to meet new people and have new experiences within that safety. But sometimes we see insecure attachments, and we have three different styles of insecure attachments. The first is an avoidant attachment. These are children who might have a lot of difficulty in trusting adults. They might be ones to shut down or have a freeze response. These are children who often appear very independent, which can be a good thing to have independence. But in this case, it's an over level of independence. For these children, we see that they maybe don't feel safe knowing that their needs are going to be met unless they're the ones meeting them. So these children might rebuff help. They might have difficulty in making friendships or connecting with other adults in their life. An ambivalent attachment is also known as an anxious ambivalent, are children who might have a really hard time being comforted. They might be unsure of what's going on. There's a lot of uncertainty for these kids. These children might need a lot of reassurance, be constantly asking if something is okay, if they're in trouble. These children might need constant caregiver attention. These children might feel not safe exploring, so they stay very close to their caregiver, maybe hiding behind their legs or clutching onto their hand, even in a safe situation. We also see a disorganized attachment. For these children, adults might seem really scary and they might have a very hard time trusting them. They often go between kind of a pulling in with adults where they really are asking for attention, they're asking for connection. And then when they get it, they push away because that's also not safe. And they're just not quite sure what to do in a situation. In this case, it's oftentimes that maybe the caregivers in their life had wildly different reactions to them. Sometimes they were very caring and very comforting, and sometimes maybe they had externalizing behaviors where there was shouting or aggression within the home. So these children aren't really sure what to do with an adult, and they're constantly seeking information to know, is this safe for me or not? So, how do we build a secure attachment? This is the heart of what we're doing in infant mental health. We're learning about cues. We're learning the language of children because we know young children do not have great language, even as they're getting older, even as they're getting into that 4-year old where we're thinking, wow, this kid is, having great vocabulary. They can talk about a lot of things. Feelings are really complex. Adults often have a hard time expressing their feelings. So a young child is going to have an even more difficult time expressing their feelings and their needs and their wants. So we learn what they need through their cues. We also want to create a secure base for children. We're going to talk about all of these a little bit more. We also want to avoid myths when taking care of children. One myth that we're going to talk about is spoiling children and spoiling babies. And then the big piece that we're going to talk a lot about is co regulation. So, how a parent's emotions, actions, and responses might impact that child and teach them how they should be responding. So, as I said, young children do not have a lot of language, especially when we're looking at infants. They're pre-verbal. Their cues can be really challenging to identify because they're often very subtle and easily missed if we're not paying attention. So, if you think about an infant, a very young infant, and some of the cues that they might have that are totally nonverbal, maybe they're playing a game with their caregiver, they're playing peekaboo, or they're playing a tickling game or something like that. And all of a sudden, their eyes start drifting away. They start looking away or turning their body from the caregiver. That can be a cue that they're a little overstimulated and they're done with that game. Other cues might be more obvious. We might have that scrunched up face and those legs pulling in and some certain sounds coming up that might let you know that it's time for a diaper change. Or maybe for a child, they're turning towards the contact of their caregiver because they're seeking out food. Those are all different examples of nonverbal cues, but they change so much as young children grow older too, and their feelings and their thoughts are becoming more complicated. Often they are showing strong emotions, and this is typically where we see people talking about behaviors in young children, where they might be viewed as negative behaviors. But within those behaviors, children are really working hard to send us cues about a need that hasn't been met. So, because there's a need that hasn't been met, they're becoming dysregulated. Maybe they're screaming, maybe they're throwing something, or becoming very upset. As kids get older, their cues are very emotional. They are always communicating to us their needs through their facial expressions, their gestures, their noises, their movement. They're always communicating with us. And that communication needs to be reciprocal. They need to be heard and responded to for them to know that it's an appropriate cue to give. So if they know, okay, every time that I cry and I turn my head towards my caregiver, they're going to give me a bottle because I'm really hungry. The more that we're following that cue, the more they're going to trust us that that's the appropriate thing to do. That's how they communicate with us. But also, they're getting feedback from us, especially as they're getting a little bit older in that maybe 2 to 4 range. As we're talking about our needs, we're showing them cues that an adult might give. So we might tell them, oh, my stomach feels really empty right now. It's kind of grumbly. I think I'm hungry and I need a snack. So, by verbalizing all of that, we're teaching children how to ask for what they need outside of those behaviors that we might be seeing otherwise. It's also important for us to recognize and verbalize when we notice a cue from a child. So saying, oh, I see that you are feeling really hungry right now, and you're telling me that you need to eat. Or telling them, I hear you, you are needing a hug right now. I'm going to pick you up and I'm going to give you some love. Let's talk about myths. One of the biggest things that I hear from young parents, especially, is this fear of picking up their child, this fear of spoiling them, creating a bad behavior for a child. And I just want to let you know that's not going to happen. When we are looking at young children, those physical and emotional needs are the most important thing to them. It is at the forefront of their brain, and they cannot focus on anything else. You cannot spoil a baby by meeting their needs. And those needs include being held, being sung to, being rocked, and being cared for. When I hear people who say, well, my baby just wants attention, or, well, my baby is just trying to manipulate me. They're trying to get me to, pick them up or give them something. Young children are not capable of manipulation. They are cognitively unable to try to get us to do something. What they're doing is communicating, I need help right now. And so I want you to remember this phrase that it's not my child is giving me a hard time, but my child is having a hard time. What cues are they showing me to meet their needs? Because, like I said, it's all communication. And I also want to dispel the myth that love equals a secure attachment. And it is a really easy myth to believe. But loving your child is not the same thing as having a secure attachment. That love is never in question. We know that even when parents don't have the skills to meet the needs of their children, or they don't have the skills to regulate themselves, they still love their children. Having a secure attachment is about the ability to respond and address the needs of babies successfully and being able to soothe them. Attachment is about security and safety. And sometimes love does not go with security and safety. So, how do we create a secure base? A secure base is when a child knows that they have that home harbor. They have that safe haven that they can go to. So, to paint a picture of this, I want you to think about going to a brand new park with a young child. So, this is someplace they've never been before. And you get to the park and they go off and they start exploring. They're trying the slide and they're going on the swings and they're climbing on stuff. And occasionally they're looking back at that caregiver. They're doing that visual check in. Maybe they fall and they get hurt and they look to you kind of as that, well, am I okay? And as they know that their parents are reliable, they're able to run out and do those things. If they don't know that their parents are reliable, that their caregivers are going to be there for them, they don't feel the safety in that exploration. To create a secure base, there has to be trust. This is vital to this relationship. That trust is what allows a baby to go into the world and try new things. And it's about knowing that their person will always be there and is there to meet their needs. And a secure base and secure attachment takes communication constantly. It's learning the language of the young child. And also, it's about communicating to them. So, like I mentioned before, recognizing, oh, I see that you're hungry. But even more so than that, we're communicating to them when maybe we can't meet their needs. We're telling them, I hear you. I'm going to be right there. I can't do it right now, but I'm coming for you. Also, it's about preparing children. So, in that example that we're going to a new park, maybe as we're walking to the park, we tell them, we're going to a new park today. And at the park, there's going to be swings and there's going to be a slide and there's going to be other children playing there. There's going to be lots of trees. And we're going to play in the fenced in area. When we're in that fenced in area, you can run around everywhere that you want to. And I'm going to be right there for you. And when it's time to go home, we will hold hands and we're going to walk back home. So that creates the environment that they're able to know what the expectations are. There's safety in knowing what is going to happen. And we also are wanting to communicate our expectations to a child. So in that situation, a child would know I expect them to stay in the fenced in area. That's the safe place. But if I don't tell them that, there's no way for them to know that that's where the boundary is. And children aren't able to read our minds and know what we mean when we tell them something. If we say, oh, we're going to play at the park, they don't know, well, where are the boundaries of the park? What does that mean? What does that look like? So, having very clear and direct and simple communication with them is very important. We also want to empower children. So, oftentimes, when we're thinking about safety for children, we can take it in the opposite direction. We can be that stereotypical helicopter caregiver where we're never more than a step away from the child and we're going to make sure that they never fall down and we're going to make sure they never experience hurt or have anything scary happen to them. And while that would be beautiful to never have anything scary or hard happen, we know that as they get older, scary and hard things are going to happen. So when we let them have those small opportunities to experience that as a young child in a safe environment, that gives them the ability as they go on later in life to say, hey, I've done hard things before and I have had scary things happen and everything has been okay and I've gotten through this. So we want to have children know that we have confidence in them, that as they're going out into the world, we think that they have it all under control. Even when we don't really feel that way. We think about the duck going swimming on the pond where on the surface it's smooth and it's calm and internally those paddles are going. That can be what it's like to have a child go into a situation where we want to empower them. We want them to see the duck on the surface that is confident and knows that they're going to be just fine. And internally, we might be thinking, oh my God, what is going to happen? But it's okay as long as we're keeping that on the inside and not projecting that onto the child. It's important for them to do risky things in a safe way and to learn how to do so. We also want to have empathy for those children. Their emotions are so strong and they feel things so very deeply. And it's important for us to validate those emotions and to understand how they might be experiencing them. So, like I mentioned, when we're not able to maybe meet a need immediately, we're telling them, I see you. I know this is really hard to wait right now. And as soon as I'm able to, I'm going to help you out. I'm going to make sure that you're okay. When they're having a moment when they're upset about something that we think might be silly, we have to recognize how very small their worlds are and how very, very deep it is to them. So while it might not be a big deal to us that we got the red cup instead of the blue cup, to them, they might have been thinking about that blue cup all day, and that was the most exciting thing, and it's their favorite color. And it's just that one happy thing that they were looking forward to, and all of a sudden it's not there. That could be devastating for them. So we want to recognize the importance of their emotions and the validity of them. Going into co-regulation, this is one of my favorite parts of this subject. So, self-regulation, you might have heard about before, and that's the ability for us to manage our thoughts, feelings, and actions. We think about self-regulation as responding versus reacting. We're not reacting out of our emotions. We're not getting overly upset about something. We're able to keep things in a controlled manner. And this is a skill that a lot of adults struggle with. The majority of adults, if you think about going to a customer service desk, we all know those moments where adults have blown up at somebody, or when you're stuck in traffic and you are yelling at the person in the car ahead of you because they just won't go, or any other situation like that. We know that adults struggle with this. We cannot expect children to be able to regulate on their own, especially when most adults aren't able to regulate on their own. So we work together for co-regulation. It's a warm and responsive way that we interact and provide support. We coach and model children. We express how to modulate our thoughts and feelings. Self regulation allows us to co regulate with our parent child dyad. So when I'm self regulated, when I am keeping things together for myself, I'm able to co regulate with a child. So the importance here is keeping ourselves calm so that we can then calm the child. We're going to talk more about how to do this. Infants and young children depend on their secure relationships to organize their understanding of the world. And co regulation is a big part of this. They're looking to you to learn how to respond. When we are talking about co regulation, there's a great acronym to remember to remain agile. So think about your affect. How are your tone and expressions conveying your emotions? Are you scowling at a child while you're comforting them? Are you laughing as they're crying? We want to think about being loving, supporting, and soothing. Be aware of your gestures, your facial expressions, your hand gestures, your posturing, and pacing. All of these reflect emotions to the child. One thing to keep in mind is we are much taller than young children, and it can be very scary for a young child to have an adult towering over them with that stern look on their face. We're kind of like giants to them. So, getting down on their level is really important. Going down on your knees, sitting on the floor, going where they are. We want to think about our intonation and modulating our tone of voice. So, are we sounding angry while we're saying something soothing? Or, like I said before, with a smile while you're trying to comfort a crying child, does your voice sound super happy and chipper? So, I think about this if I, got hurt. If I skinned my knee and somebody said, "Oh, you're okay," I might be like, well, no, I'm not. That really hurt. But when somebody says, wow, that really hurt you, didn't it? I'm sorry about that. That makes me feel like they have a little more empathy for me. They understand that this was not a fun experience for me. So, latency is also important. We need to wait. We need to be okay with being silent for a minute. Sometimes we'll kind of pile on ways to help a child and to make them feel better. We'll say one thing after another, and it's going so fast that they're not really able to process all of that. So we want to offer some comfort and wait a little bit, remain silent, be there. And then if that's not working, try something else. We also want to keep engaged. We want to make sure that we're being aware of how they're responding to us. Are they turning away? Are they not ready to talk to us about something? because sometimes they need a little more time. Sometimes we're not the right person to talk to them. So, making sure that you're staying engaged with them, that you're not giving up is really important as well. We want to model the appropriate behaviors. Children are scientists. They are constantly gathering their data and learning about the world through the way that we're responding to it. I love this picture so much because it really shows that great modeling for a child, and it also shows something that's called the zone of proximal development. So you can see that that adult is kind of adjusting the child's posture and showing them what to do. So in the zone of proximal development, we're helping a child just enough to get them to be able to do something, but also not helping them so much that we're doing it for them. This ties back into that empowering. So we don't want to be backed off so much that they're not able to obtain a skill, but we don't want to do it so much for them that they don't learn anything from it. And a good way of doing this is modeling them. We show them what we want them to do. If we're getting upset about something, we're showing them, okay, when I'm mad, I'm going to take 3 deep breaths and I'm going to take a walk. I am not going to yell at somebody. I'm not going to throw something across the room. I am not going to curse. When we are doing those things, children pick up on it and they learn, oh, this is what I do when I'm mad. This is what I do when I'm sad. So we want to make sure that they're learning the right things to do from us because they are wonderful small mirrors and they will always show our behavior back to us. We want to keep our communication in mind. So tune in to the way that your baby uses their cues to articulate their needs, even before they can start to talk. And like I said, have that response to them and let them know that you understood what they were saying. So it's more than just meeting the need, which is good. And it's what we need to have happen. But if you want to take it that step further, it's also communicating it, saying, oh, I saw that you were grabbing for that toy that was out of reach. Here, let me hand it to you. So you met the need, but you also told them you did something that told me what you needed. And I know that it can get overwhelming when we think about responding to a child's cues because, especially infants, are constantly in need of something. They're constantly telling us that they want something, that something is going wrong with them. And that can be very overwhelming to feel like you have to meet all of those needs. And the truth is that you don't have to meet 100% of the needs. We want you to meet as many as possible, but it's not always possible. Sometimes we don't understand what the need is because maybe the need was that the lights were just a little bit too bright and I didn't like that and it hurt my eyes. But that's really hard to pick up on for an infant. So there is a lot of research out there about a good enough parent. And a good enough parent meets the percentage of needs that a child has to have met to reach a secure attachment. We're thinking, and the research is showing, that that's somewhere between 30 to 50% of needs. You might think, well, that's barely any at all. But remember, there are a lot of needs that are happening that we're not hearing about. There are a lot of cues that we're missing. So, this gives that margin for error and misunderstanding because a lot of them are very complicated. It's much more than I need a bottle, I need a change, I need to sleep. Sometimes it's the tag on my onesie is scratching me, and I think that's the most horrible sensation on earth. We might not understand that cue. So, give yourself some grace within this, but also try to learn those cues and try to meet as many as possible. We want to make sure that we're using active listening with children. We engage them with our body language and our eye contact, our volume, and appropriate verbal responses. I think that, we've all seen times where maybe a caregiver is distracted by something. They're cooking dinner, or they just got home and they need 5 minutes to relax. So they're playing on their phone, or somebody else is talking to them. Their child asks for something and they respond in something completely different. We want to make sure that we're trying to reduce that as much as we can and have appropriate responses to children so that they know that we're really tuned in to what is important to them. We want to try to reduce those distractions and barriers as much as possible. It's not realistic to eliminate all distractions and barriers. And it's not realistic to say, I'll never be on my phone or I'll never have the TV on. But we want to do the best that we can with what we have. With North Country, we really focus on taking a strengths based approach with children. This brings attention to all of the amazing things that make up both a child and their parent, as well as the strength that there is in the relationship. So we first start on what is going well and how can I build up from here? We don't want to highlight deficits. It can be so easy to do it. And our brains are hardwired to see the things that are not going well so that we can fix them. But it can become really difficult to focus on those deficits and only look at those and only look at the ways that we're not doing something right or the ways that our child is having a hard time. And to look at that and become so focused and drilled into it. We think about digging a hole with all of those deficits. We're digging and digging and digging. But we want to build up. So if we have this massive hole that we then have to fill in, and then we have to build on top of that, that's really difficult. But if we're focusing on strengths, we're saying there's already a structure here. There's something that I can work with. And then we build on top of that. Think about how much higher our structure is going to be. So we want to take the skills that are already there and expand on them. And every family is going to have such different strengths. Every child is going to have different strengths. So focusing in on that specific family and that specific child's strengths are very important versus focusing on what strengths you might see in another child or family. Parental mental health is also key to infant mental health. It has a huge impact on the children. Like I mentioned before, we have what happens in one part of the family affects another part of the family. So when a parent is struggling, a child is often going to be struggling. When a parent is doing really well, a child is often going to be doing well. And I want to make a note that mental health is not synonymous with mental illness. You can have a mental illness, but be in good mental health. Or you can be free of a mental illness and have poor mental health. So, this is not a sentence to parents who have a mental illness saying that because you have a mental illness, your child is always going to struggle. That's not true because you can have an illness and still be doing really well. So, we want to think again about strengths. We want to make sure that they're receiving therapeutic interventions and supports. One of the things that I talk about a lot in my work with families is holding. I am there to emotionally hold the parent and to hold their story so that they can be there to hold their child. Parents are not islands. They need support, they need community, and they need people to help them to be great parents and be there for their children. Why is this all important? Why am I so passionate about this? Well, one reason is that infants are the most vulnerable people because they depend entirely on adults to protect them from harm and meet their needs. And those basic human needs include their emotional needs. We also know that relationships are the most important factor for children. When we look at all of the research and all of the literature about children who are resilient and who bounce back, it is always listed in there that they have had a caring and responsive adult in their life. Whether that's a parent or not, somebody in their life was there for them who they formed an attachment with. It allows them to let their brain develop and create pathways for emotional and cognitive success. Because of infants' vulnerability, they are high risk. Children are at risk for suffering poor outcomes, both physically, emotionally, and cognitively, if they don't have a supportive environment and their needs met. We also know that having strong mental health in early childhood and infancy is shown to reduce mental illness later in life. I've said before, we're building a foundation here. We're putting in all of those seeds in our garden that are going to grow as a child grows up too. So we want to make sure that they have all of those skills from before they even know what a skill is. Prevention also provides opportunities for positive impact. During infancy, brain development is happening rapidly. Over 1 million neural connections are made every second. This is the time of the most brain development. Those early relationships and experiences that a child encounters directly impacts the way that their brain is wired. Because if their brain is only focused on meeting their needs, making sure that they're safe and that they're fed and that they're cared for, it's not able to think about all of the other things happening. It's not able to process information. It's not able to think for an hour about what the color green really is, or to stare out that window and hear the birds and see the flowers and the trees. They're not able to absorb all of that information because their brain is too focused on their basic needs. We also want to provide positive examples for a young child. We want them to see positive relationships and have positive interactions so that they have that foundation as they go through life. If a child only knows mistreatment, that is what they will expect as they get older. If a child only has good, secure attachments where their needs are met, they're going to be questioning when that's not happening. When they are 25 years old and they're in that really serious relationship and somebody treats them poorly, they're going to say, that's not right. That's not what a person who loves you does. We want them to have all of these things built into the wiring of their brain from an early stage. How do we measure success? At North Country, one of the ways that we do this is through an assessment called the Devereaux Early Childhood Assessment. So within this, we measure for initiative. So a child's ability to think independently, use their skills and knowledge, and know that they can meet their needs, whether through a caregiver or on their own. We also measure attachment relationships. So the strength of those long-term relationships with significant adults, again, not necessarily parents. And then we look at the total protective factors. So this is a combination of the two other factors, and it gives our overall strength of a child. So I said before, we look at strengths first. What I see in this, and I do these every 3 months for my clients, is that for our families who are going through mental health programs, our parents who are getting help, our children who are in IMH services, oftentimes what's happening is we're going from those measures being in a need or even typical level to then shifting into a strength to where we don't have to worry about this. This isn't a concern at all. And we know that as they grow older, those initiative and attachment relationship factors are going to impact how they're learning in school. It's going to impact how they're able to form relationships with other children, with other adults, and it's going to help to set them up for success. Another way that we can support families is through the myStrength app. So this is something that North Country offers to our community and to our clients. And some of the things that I love about this app are the sections on building resilience, navigating life, and skills practicing. But my favorite is the pregnancy and early parenting section. So, in this section, there are so many articles that have fantastic information about how to work with your co parent, how to ask for help, how you're adjusting to the idea of being a parent. It gives you information about feelings that you might have after giving birth. It might give you problem solving activities. It gives you journal prompts. It's a really great resource for families to use. And that's all that I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that I can hop into the chat and see if there's any questions.
Yeah, and also, if you guys raise your hand, there's a little icon at the top. You can raise your hand, and I can actually turn on your microphone so you can ask your questions that way as well. Got a question incoming.
How does an infant get referred to me? So there are a couple of ways of doing this for infant mental health at North Country. The first way and the best way is through our access line. So if you go to our website, it'll have that number on our front page. You can call that and say, I'm interested in infant mental health. We have 2 infant mental health workers for North Country, and we cover 3 different counties each. And then the other way that I get referrals is through the health department. We have a lot of parents who are involved in either the maternal infant health program or Healthy Families. And their health department nurse will sometimes reach out to me and say, hey, I have somebody who's struggling. Can you reach out to them and see if they'd be interested in infant mental health? So those are the 2 primary ways of getting services at North Country.
As we're waiting for another question to come in, I kind of had one. This is a great presentation, and like every time I had a question, you answered it in the next slide. So I was like trying to find a question, but there was one that came up where you mentioned that babies don't really notice the birds outside the window, and I found that really fascinating. So I'm just wondering, like, when does that change happen? When is there I know that probably that exact time, but on like what stage of development would that kind of start being more like you could notice those kinds of things?
That's a great question. So, first off, for the first couple of months, babies actually have terrible vision. If you don't know this, they can only see about this far. So, oftentimes, it's actually the distance of holding a baby and seeing their parent's face. So, they're
Mm.
very fascinated with faces. But as they're getting up to about 6 months old, they're really exploring their environment a lot more. And the reason I mention that is when they're so focused on their needs being met, they're not able to have the cognitive ability to focus outside of that. So, a 6 month old who has all of their needs met is able to really observe those things and to engage in that. But if they are worried about not being fed or not being held when they need to be, they're not able to focus outside of that. So you'll see as they start getting a little bit older, their eyes will start tracking things. And that's when they're really starting to pick up on things in their environment. Um, and as they're going into that toddlerhood, so after a year, they're really starting to categorize information. So they're pulling in everything in their environment and starting to understand, a dog is a dog, and a cat is not a dog. They're different, even though they have 4 legs and a tail, or a tree and a bush are different things. So that all comes as they get a little bit older and into that preschool stage, really understanding the differences between things. But it's definitely important that they're able to focus on stuff like that.
Great.
And
Awesome.
we had a question of what is dysregulation? Great question. So, dysregulation is typically when we see either internalizing behaviors or externalizing behaviors. It's when the body is in a state of disruption. Oftentimes, we'll talk about like a trauma response. So, a fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That's a form of dysregulation, but it's not always caused by trauma. It's just the body knowing that something is happening that I do not like. So, dysregulation for an infant can be crying, it can be distress, it could be them not engaging with a person around them or kind of shutting down. For toddlers, we think about meltdowns where the whole world has ended and maybe they're laying on the floor and screaming. That's a really good example of dysregulation. But dysregulation can also mean isolation or crying quietly or not being able to talk to other people because there's a lot of fear going on. It's a very embodied response. So the heart might be beating really quickly, breaths might be coming fast, kids might feel clammy or really hot. That's general dysregulation. It can look like a lot of different things for different children.
Thank you. Any more questions? Again, you can raise your hand or put them in the chat. Okay, well, I'm seeing none, so just want to thank Teresa
Thanks, Steve.
again for this wonderful presentation. This is recorded and it will be posted up on both agencies' websites at the end of the series. And just a reminder, we do have 2 more virtual series next week. So on Tuesday next week, we have a panel of our fabulous IT teams from both agencies giving a talk on keeping yourself safe online. A very useful resource there. And also on Thursday, May 25th, we have another panel from representatives from both agencies talking about health is our wealth and really talking about how both agencies are enacting programs that integrate both physical and mental health. It's a really important topic to discuss. So thanks again to Teresa. And thank you all for attending this presentation, and we will see you on Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.